She called me too poor for her circle, too quiet, too nothing. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I had spent 12 years building something she could never buy. Then one night at our high school reunion, her world and mine collided. Her brother was dying. There was only one surgeon in the state who could save him, and she was standing.
Hey there, welcome to Revenge Uncovered with Nora, where we bring you unforgettable stories, shocking twists, and powerful real-life moments. If you love emotional and dramatic storytelling, you're in the right place. Subscribe and join the journey.
I wasn't planning to go to the reunion, but closure has a strange way of inviting itself. I stood at the entrance of the Lakewood Grand Hotel ballroom, gripping my clutch. The room glittered with chandeliers and old money. The music was soft, the laughter was loud, and right there, across the polished floor, were the two people I had never quite managed to move past. Sienna Cole, my ex-best friend, and Evan Mercer, the boyfriend who had chosen her. Sienna's smile arrived first, thin, practiced. "Wow, Aria, you look the same." Evan tilted his head, still keeping things simple. The laughter wasn't loud, it was surgical. It found the exact spot where my confidence lived and pressed down, hard. I was 17 again, standing in that hallway outside the gym, reading a message I wasn't supposed to see. Betrayed, exposed, frozen. Sienna leaned in close, voice almost warm. "I'm glad you survived that little meltdown after graduation." The music kept humming, glasses kept clinking. They introduced me with the ease of people who had always controlled every room they walked into. "This is Aria," Sienna said. She was intense in high school. She paused, had a rough patch senior year. They didn't say cheating, they didn't say betrayal, they implied instability, like I was the one who had cracked, not the one who had been broken. I smiled calmly. Inside, something old tightened in my chest. Someone asked what I did now. "I work in medicine." They nodded with the polite, vague smile of people already thinking about something else. I let them move on. Sienna flashed her diamond ring every chance she got, the kind of ring that catches light from across the room. Evan kept one hand at her waist, possessive and easy, like a man who had never once questioned whether he deserved what he had. "You always said you'd move to a big city and do something huge," Sienna said sweetly, tilting her head at me. "Life doesn't always turn out like we planned, does it?" She wasn't asking, she was landing a point. I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct her. I just checked my watch and let the silence stretch the way only someone with nothing to prove can afford to let it stretch. And then the ballroom doors behind me swung open. He walked in without announcement. Tall, quiet, grounded. The kind of man who doesn't need a room to notice him because rooms always do anyway. Daniel Bennett, my husband. He wasn't wearing anything flashy. He didn't scan for anyone to impress. He just moved through the crowd with the calm confidence of someone who had already built everything he needed. But people recognized him. The whispers started almost immediately, soft at first, then spreading like ripples across still water. "That's Daniel Bennett. The hospital group? He owns Meridian Medical Network." I watched Sienna's smile shift just slightly, a flicker of recalibration behind her eyes. And Daniel walked straight to me, not to the bar, not to the crowd, directly to me. He kissed my temple gently, the way he always did when he knew I was holding something difficult. "You okay?" he asked, quiet enough that only I could hear. It was such a small question, but it carried 12 years of knowing me. Someone approached him immediately, a man in a dark blazer with an eager handshake. "Are you the Bennett behind the East Side Surgical Center?" Daniel nodded, easy and calm. "That's us." Sienna's eyes moved between us. They narrowed slightly. The recalibration was happening faster now. And across the room, Evan looked at me differently than he had 10 minutes ago. Sienna recovered quickly. She always did. That had always been her gift, reading a room and spinning it. She laughed, bright and loud, the way she did when she needed to control the temperature of a moment. "Oh my God, Aria, you married well." I kept my voice even. I married kind. The silence that followed was its own kind of reply. Sienna blinked once. Evan looked at the floor. The group around us shifted, almost imperceptibly, the way crowds do when the balance of a room quietly changes. And then the ballroom doors behind me swung open. He walked in without announcement, tall, quiet, grounded, the kind of man who doesn't need a room to notice him, because rooms always do anyway. Daniel Bennett, my husband. He wasn't wearing anything flashy. He didn't scan for anyone to impress. He just moved through the crowd with the calm confidence of someone who had already built everything he needed. But people recognized him. The whispers started almost immediately, soft at first, then
That's us. Sienna's eyes moved between us. They narrowed slightly. The recalibration was happening faster now. And across the room, Evan looks at me differently than he had 10 minutes ago. Sienna recovered quickly. She always did. That had always been her gift, reading a room and spinning it. She laughed, bright and loud, the way she did when she needed to control the temperature of a moment. "Oh my God, Aria, you married well." I kept my voice even. I married kind. The silence that followed was its own kind of reply. Sienna blinked once. Evan looked at the floor. The group around us shifted, almost imperceptibly, the way crowds do when the balance of a room quietly changes. And then a pale young man stepped through the ballroom doors. I recognized Liam Cole the moment I saw him, even after so many years. Sienna's younger brother. He had her same dark eyes, her same sharp jaw, but everything else was different now. He was thin in a way that concerned me, gray in a way that had nothing to do with age. My medical instincts fired before I could stop them. I watched him cross the room slowly, carefully, the way patients move when pain has become familiar. I leaned in slightly and overheard a quiet exchange nearby, two guests who clearly knew the family. Late-stage pancreatic, rare vascular involvement. My pulse slowed. I knew that complication. I had spent years learning it. "We're flying him out next month," Sienna said to someone across the room, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch it. "No one here can handle it." Later in the corridor, I passed close enough to see the medical bracelet on Liam's wrist. The hospital name stopped me cold. I knew that case note style. I had trained under the team that developed it. There was only one surgeon in the state who handled that specific vascular complication. The procedure was rare, delicate, almost entirely dependent on one set of hands. Mine. Daniel came up behind me quietly. He had seen my face. "Are you going to tell them?" he asked. I shook my head and kept walking. An hour later, I slipped away to the restroom to breathe. The marble was cold and quiet. I stood at the sink and pressed my hands against the basin, looking at my own reflection, not at the girl they still thought I was, but the woman I had become when no one was watching. Sienna followed me in. She didn't waste time on small talk. She planted herself in the center of the room, chin up, eyes sharp. "You don't get to rewrite history just because you married rich." I turned to face her calmly. I didn't rewrite anything. I moved. Something shifted in her expression. She reached out and grabbed my wrist, not violently, but hard, more than she intended. I pulled back, and my heel caught the edge of the polished tile. I went down before I could catch myself. My right hand hit the marble edge first. The pain was immediate and bright, a clean, sharp signal shooting up through my arm. I stayed still for a moment, breathing slowly, running through the checklist in my head the way doctors do before panic is allowed to arrive. Not broken. The bones were intact. I sat up carefully and flexed my fingers, and felt it, the slightest tremor. My surgical hand. The next morning, I sat in a private exam room at Meridian, while Dr. Yates, our senior orthopedist, reviewed my imaging with the locker room whispers, the lunch table that suddenly had no room, the screenshots Sienna had sent, screenshots of private conversations I had shared in confidence, passed around like gossip currency. "You're dramatic," they had said. "You're too sensitive." They had tried to freeze me there, at 17, in that hallway, tried to make that the permanent version of me, the girl who cracked, not the one who had been pushed. My phone buzzed on the desk, an unknown number from the hospital system. I picked up. It was Liam. His voice was soft, weak in the way that comes from real illness, not dramatics. "I know what she did to you," Liam said. "I was 13. I heard more than they knew." He paused to breathe. "I wasn't part of it. I want you to know that." He didn't beg. He didn't try to leverage guilt or sympathy or anything else. He just said what he needed to say, plainly and honestly. "I just want the best chance." I held the phone and said nothing for a long moment. In my lap, my right hand trembled once, faint but real, and then went still. The following morning, the hospital board recommended a transfer to a specialist team in Chicago. Larger team, shared liability, the safe institutional choice. What they didn't say, but what I knew from the data, was that Chicago's outcomes for Liam's exact complication were weaker than mine. Their survival rates were lower by a margin that mattered. I sat in the meeting and kept my face neutral. After it ended, I walked back to my office. Sienna was waiting outside the door. She didn't have an audience, just the two of us in a quiet corridor under humming fluorescent lights. Sienna broke. Not dramatically, not with perfect tears. She broke the ugly way, voice catching, hands gripping her elbows, eyes wet and not at all composed. "I was jealous," she said. "You were always ahead of me, smarter, more focused. I couldn't close the gap, so I tried to pull you back instead." She couldn't hold my gaze. I looked at her, not as someone who had wronged me, not as someone I needed to forgive on command. I looked at her as what she also was right now, the sister of my patient. That was the only lens that mattered. I scheduled the surgery, not out of forgiveness, not yet, and not out of revenge, because revenge would have meant walking away. I scheduled it because I could do it safely. My hand had steadied over the preceding days. Each morning showed less tremor, more control. I ran every test, consulted with Dr. Yates, and was honest with myself about what I found. My hands were ready. Liam deserved the best chance. That was the whole of it. The operating room doors were scheduled to close at 7 the next morning. The operating room was cold and bright and perfectly still, the way it always is before things begin. I stood at the table and breathed slowly, letting the familiar sounds settle around me. The soft beep of monitors, the quiet movements of the scrub team, the controlled rhythm of the room. I made the first cut. Slow, precise, every movement deliberate. An hour in, as we approached the most delicate section of the procedure, the vascular repair, where the margin for error narrowed to almost nothing, I felt it. A slight tremor. I paused. 1 breath. 2. I corrected, I steadied, and I kept going. Hours passed. The room stayed focused. And then the monitor alarms spiked